She bought a first-class ticket. She boarded with grace. But moments later, she was ordered to leave her seat, no explanation, no apology. Why? Because she didn't look like she belonged. Selena Brooks, a quiet, elegant black woman and respected international educator, had flown hundreds of times. But on this flight, something was different. The stares, the silence, the weight of invisible judgment pressing against her dignity. Who was the woman in seat 2A? Why did the flight attendant target her without cause? And how could one silent removal unravel into a global reckoning? What no one knew was that Selena wasn't just a passenger. She was a catalyst, a woman with a past, a purpose, and the power to change not only the airline industry, but the way we see each other at 30,000 feet. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about what happens after the injustice. It's about dignity, resistance, legacy. So grab a quiet seat and prepare your heart, because this story will take you higher than any flight ever could. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss a story that speaks truth, challenges silence, and lifts us all. Let's begin. The boarding line moved slowly, like it always did near the end of Group 1. People dragged roller bags, fidgeted with phones, adjusted their coats, and sighed in practiced unison. Gate 42A at O'Hare buzzed with the usual chorus of wheels, chatter, and boarding announcements. Selena Brooks stepped forward when her row was called. No fanfare, no designer sunglasses or entourage, just a dark navy wool coat. Her hair swept neatly into a low bun, and a compact leather briefcase held in her left hand. On her wrist, a simple silver watch, timeless, precise. Her boarding pass had already been scanned without issue at the gate, but now she stood at the aircraft doorway, greeted by a flight attendant who gave her a polite, narrow-lipped smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," the attendant said, barely glancing at her. "Straight ahead to the left." Selena nodded once and stepped inside the aircraft. The temperature change hit instantly cooler, drier, with that faint scent of coffee, pressurized air, and overused fabric. Row 2A waited for her like a quiet invitation. Window seat, first class. She eased into the seat carefully, placed her briefcase under the front compartment, and pulled out a slim tablet before settling back. The man in 2B barely glanced her way. He was already buried in emails, typing furiously on a company-issued laptop. The cabin crew bustled about with pre-flight duties. Bins snapped shut. Safety cards rustled. A low murmur from behind as the rest of first class filled up. Selena looked out the window. It was snowing lightly over Chicago. The flakes caught in the orange glow of the tarmac lights, swirling like ash. For a moment, she let herself breathe it in. The stillness, the control. Her heart settled into its familiar metronomic beat. Until she heard the voice. "Excuse me, ma'am." It was soft, hesitant, but sharp enough to pierce her quiet. Selena turned to find a second flight attendant slightly younger, strawberry blonde, face flushed from rushing, standing just beside her seat. Her name tag read Megan. "Yes," Selena asked, evenly. I wanted to confirm something about your seat assignment," Megan said, trying for a smile that didn't quite land. "There may have been a mistake." Selena blinked once. "A mistake?" "Yes. Megan gestured toward the boarding pass still tucked beneath Selena's tablet. "Could I see your ticket again?" Selena handed it over without hesitation. Megan scanned it with a handheld device. It beeped green. She frowned, then scanned it again. "Same beep." "I see," Megan said, eyes narrowing slightly. "And how did you purchase this ticket, if I may ask?" The question floated awkwardly between them. "Through the corporate account," Selina replied. "Why do you ask?" Megan looked up. "It's just, we've had a few irregularities lately, and we're required to double-check premium upgrades, especially for first class." Selina didn't move, didn't bristle. "Is that policy applied to all passengers? Or just me?" she asked quietly. Megan flinched ever so slightly. "I'll be right back," she said. She left quickly, walking toward the front of the plane. The man in 2B looked up now, slowly, his brows pulled together, but he said nothing, just went back to typing. Selina sat still, not surprised, not shaken, just aware. Aware of the familiar weight of unspoken accusation, aware of how quickly dignity could be questioned when it arrived in skin that didn't fit someone else's assumptions. She folded her hands over her lap and waited. Megan returned 30 seconds later with another crew member, a tall man in his early 50s, uniform pressed, eyes scanning passengers like a scanner. His name tag read Thomas. "Ma'am," he said briskly. "May I see your ID?" Selina handed over her driver's license. Thomas compared it to her boarding pass, then held both up against the overhead light for no clear reason. Behind them, someone coughed. The murmurs began. "Ma'am," he said again, "this seat is assigned to a Miss Selina Brooks." "Yes," she said, with a faint smile. "That would be me." He hesitated. "Do you have any additional verification? Proof of purchase? We've had incidents lately of duplicate bookings and unauthorized upgrades." Selina nodded slowly. "Would you like to see my credit card as well?" "That would be appreciated." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a silver corporate card. He read it, blinked at the name embossed there, SB Holdings, Selina Brooks, then turned it over, as if that might change the facts. By now, 2 passengers were openly watching. One, a young man across the aisle in 3D, had lifted his phone discreetly and tapped record. Another, seated in row 1C, exchanged a look with her husband. Selina glanced toward the front of the plane. The door was still open. Boarding hadn't yet finished. She noted the time. 3:13 p.m. Thomas returned the card and ID without apology. "We'll need just a few more minutes," he said. "Please remain seated while we verify with our ground team." "I'm not going anywhere," Selina replied calmly. "You may take the time you need." Thomas nodded stiffly and walked off. Megan stayed behind, lingering awkwardly. "I'm sure it's just a technical thing," she said, voice tight. "These systems glitch all the time." Selina said nothing, just offered a gentle, almost sorrowful smile. "I hope you're right." Megan bit her lip, then turned to tend to another row. The man in 2B closed his laptop and turned to Selina. "I've flown this airline for 22 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen them check anyone like that before." Selina didn't answer, but she looked out the window again. The snow was heavier now. Outside, the world looked gentle. Inside, something else was brewing. Selina didn't remember when she first learned the art of silence, only that it came long before any job title or contract, long before anyone ever called her ma'am or CEO or executive partner, before all the boardrooms and polished wood tables, before the leather chairs and quarterly reviews and contract renewals worth more than some towns' annual budgets. She learned it at 9, in a bank lobby on the south side of Houston. Her mother stood in line in a faded blazer, holding a folder of papers so carefully it might as well have been glass. Selina sat on one of those plastic chairs with metal legs, the kind that always made a faint screech on tiled floors when you moved. Her feet didn't reach the ground. She swung them slowly, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Her mother approached the counter with hope in her voice. The banker, a man in a charcoal suit who barely looked up, glanced at the papers, then at her mother. Something changed in his expression. His tone cooled. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That kind of loan isn't usually offered for businesses like that." Like what her mother had asked gently. He didn't answer. Selina had watched her mother walk out of the bank 10 minutes later, back straight, head high. But something had broken. Selina felt it, even at 9. That was the day she learned what a no could sound like without ever using the word no. That was the day she learned that some people would question your presence not because of what you did, but because of what they thought you couldn't possibly be. Now, 29 years later, sitting in seat 2A, that feeling returned like an old bruise pressed under a fresh suit. She was still holding her tablet, but her eyes were unfocused. The email on the screen glowed softly. Subject: Atlas Air Equity Review. Final meeting in San Diego time. 5:00 p.m. PST location. Atlas Air West Coast HQ presenter Selina Brooks, founder and CEO, SB Holdings. She tapped the screen off and sat back. The cabin buzzed faintly behind her. A low hum of voices, the sound of zippers, a child laughing somewhere in coach. And still, no one had returned to speak to her. No clarification, no apology, just waiting. Always waiting. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a soft leather portfolio. Inside were a few printed agendas, handwritten notes, and the final report she was set to deliver in just under 3 hours. It was ironic, really. She had spent the past 18 months working with Atlas Air's executive leadership to help reduce bias in frontline staff interactions. The first quarter had been all data collection, surveys, interviews, trend analysis. The second quarter, she helped design the empathy protocol now being piloted in 4 major airports. The third quarter had been training modules. And now, the final quarter was implementation. That meeting was the finish line. And here she was, being stopped before takeoff. She closed the portfolio and stared ahead. The man in 2B cleared his throat again. He'd been watching her in short, uncertain glances. Finally, he leaned a bit closer. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," he said. "But oh, you're handling this better than I would." Selina smiled faintly. "There's no reward for rage." "Still," he replied, "it's hard to watch." She turned to him now, her expression soft. "That's kind of you to say." He gave a quick nod and returned to his seat, visibly uncomfortable but sincere. Selina looked past him toward the aisle. Megan and Thomas still hadn't returned. A young man 2 rows back, maybe college-aged, wearing wireless earbuds and a Columbia University hoodie, was watching the interaction unfold through his phone. He wasn't hiding it anymore. Selina met his eyes briefly. He nodded once. She nodded back. It had begun. She reached for her water bottle and unscrewed the cap slowly, more to steady her hands than out of thirst. Her mind moved in 2 tracks, now one monitoring her surroundings and the other flipping through decades of hard-won resilience. This wasn't new. This wasn't surprising. What was different, maybe, was that she wasn't 25 anymore. She wasn't a junior associate getting asked if she was in the right room during investor meetings. She wasn't 32 and being mistaken for someone's assistant at tech conferences. She wasn't even 39, arriving at her own panel only to be redirected to the guest seating. No, now she was 42. She was a parent, a mentor, a strategist. She had advised 3 Fortune 500 companies on cultural restructuring. She had written white papers on implicit bias long before the term trended. She had sat across from boardrooms of all white men and explained how inclusion was not a trend, but a metric of survival. And yet, here, on flight 2270 from Chicago to San Diego, sitting in 2A, she was still being quietly questioned, still made to wait, still assumed to be in the wrong place. Selina closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her daughter, Ava, who had just turned 12 last week. Thought of how Ava had asked her the night before, "Mom, has anyone ever treated you different?" Like, just because Selina had answered with a smile and a quiet, "Yes." But she hadn't said how often, or how deep it cut even when you learned to wear armor. Her phone buzzed again in her lap. A text this time. "Ellen Royce running late, but excited to see your final presentation. So grateful for your leadership. Selina, this partnership has already changed so much for us." Selina stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "Still en route. May have a story to tell when I land." She didn't hit send yet. She wasn't sure which story it would be. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She felt it again, the choice tightening in her chest. She could end this right now. One email, one phone call, and this flight would stop in its tracks. She had that authority. The irony was bitter. They were unknowingly detaining their own reform consultant in the very seat she had helped ensure more people could occupy without suspicion. But something inside her resisted. There was value in the exposure, in letting it play out, not for her ego, not for revenge, but for truth. She glanced at the Columbia student again. He was speaking quietly into his phone now. Live streaming. Her name hadn't been mentioned yet. Her title hadn't been announced. She still held the cards, still had control of the moment. She tucked the phone away and folded her hands once more in her lap. This wasn't about seat 2A. It was about all the seats she'd taken in her life that others assumed didn't belong to her, and the silent strength it took, over and over, to sit down anyway, to stay seated, to wait not for permission, but for recognition. The energy on the plane had shifted. Selina could feel it before anyone said a word, before a single passenger stood or a crew member returned. It was something in the air, a quiet bristling, the kind that builds before a thunderstorm, when the clouds thicken and everyone knows something is coming but pretends they don't. The Columbia student, Jordan, had angled his phone toward the front of the cabin. His voice was low but distinct as he whispered into his AirPods, not realizing he was recording more than a video. He was capturing a moment, the kind of moment that the world sometimes missed in real time, but devoured in replay. Seat 2A, a black woman sitting in silence, dignified, composed, waiting, and no one was telling her why. A few rows behind, a mother with 2 small children shifted in her seat. She glanced forward, whispered to her husband. He looked up, followed her gaze, then looked back down, as if uncertain whether it was safe to engage. Across the aisle, an older man with reading glasses folded his newspaper. He had been pretending to read the same article for the last 15 minutes. Still, no one from the crew had returned. Selina adjusted her posture slightly and looked out the window. The tarmac stretched wide beneath the wing. Orange cones lined like markers in a quiet graveyard. She let her fingers rest gently on her briefcase and took one steady breath. Not too deep, not too shallow. She had learned how to regulate her presence, how to take up just enough space to be visible without being threatening. But she was tired of it. Across from her, the man in 2B finally spoke again. "You're calm, but this feels wrong. Just wrong." Selina gave him a half smile. "It is." She didn't offer more. Sometimes the truth didn't need layering. As if on cue, the curtain near the galley rustled. Meg Carter reappeared, looking stiff, too deliberate. Her eyes scanned the front row quickly, then landed on Selina. She approached with the kind of smile that tried to pass for protocol but cracked at the corners. Miss Brooks, Megan said softly, though everyone could hear. We're still working on a small issue with the seat assignment. I appreciate your patience. Selina blinked once. Her voice was calm, but firm. What issue? Megan hesitated. It seems this seat might have been flagged for maintenance. We're verifying it now. Selina leaned forward slightly. I scanned my boarding pass. It cleared. The seat was assigned to me. If there's a maintenance issue, why was I allowed to board? Behind her, someone shifted loudly. The older man with the newspaper folded his arms and exhaled sharply. I've been flying 40 years, he muttered. This doesn't look like maintenance. Jordan lowered his phone slightly. Y'all sure it's the seat that's the issue? Or who's sitting in it? A few passengers murmured. The tide was turning. Megan's smile wavered. She looked toward the galley, as if hoping for backup, then straightened. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to wait just a little longer while we clarify with the gate staff. Please don't escalate things. Selina's eyebrow rose. I'm not the one escalating. With that, Megan walked briskly back through the curtain. Jordan turned to the man next to him and whispered, Did she just say don't escalate? The reply was a quiet, disgusted chuckle. Selina looked down at her hands. Her nails were short, clean, unpainted. She had always preferred them that way. Functional, honest, like her leadership style. But now, under this scrutiny, under a dozen uncertain gazes, her body felt like a stage, a silent courtroom. She wasn't just a woman in 2A. She was a symbol. Of what? They hadn't decided yet. The man in 2B leaned over again. Look, I don't know what's going on, but if you need someone to speak up, I'll say something. This doesn't feel right. Selina nodded once. I appreciate that. Truly. She didn't tell him that sometimes the most powerful response wasn't the loudest one. Sometimes, the quiet refusal to move carried more weight than shouting ever could. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Selina stared at the screen embedded in the seat in front of her. The airline's logo pulsed gently. A commercial played on mute, showing happy passengers and smiling crew members, each one receiving careful service with cheerful music in the background. It felt like mockery. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Ellen Royce. Hey, just got word that your name didn't show up on the system for 2A. Weird glitch. You okay? Selina narrowed her eyes. That meant the airline's internal system had flagged her name or boarding pass incorrectly. That also meant someone had likely changed something after check-in. She responded, still seated, not moved, but yes, something's wrong. This time, she hit send. 3 rows back, someone called out, Excuse me, can we get moving? We're about to be 30 minutes late. Another voice. Is this because of a seat? Just switch and let's go. The tension began to splinter. Not everyone understood. Not everyone cared. For some, time was more important than truth. Selina stayed silent. She had been trained for moments like this, but she hadn't prepared for them to happen in front of this many people, in such a casual setting, over something as ridiculous and sharp as a seat. A few minutes later, Thomas Hargrove emerged from the cockpit. His jaw was tight. His eyes narrowed as he approached. He stopped in front of Selina and crouched slightly, so they were at eye level. Miss Brooks, he began, I'm sorry for the delay. There seems to have been an issue with your boarding credentials syncing with our system. It's caused a holdup on departure, and we need to resolve it before we can move forward." Selina tilted her head. "And what would you like me to do?" "We're going to ask you to deplane briefly while we reset the manifest and reassign the seat." Selina's voice didn't rise. "Why me? Why not just check the data while I remain seated?" He hesitated. "It's policy." Selina looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder. She handed it to him. Inside were 3 documents: her verified boarding pass, time-stamped and scanned, a copy of her contract with Atlas Air, signed by the executive board, her clearance badge for the San Diego meeting marked as top-level partner access. Thomas stared at the folder, then at her. You're the keynote speaker." Selina nodded. "And I've been sitting here for 40 minutes while you tried to erase me from the manifest." The cabin went still. Someone gasped. A child whispered, "What's a keynote speaker?" Thomas stood up slowly. His face was pale. Selina leaned back. She didn't move from the seat, didn't raise her voice, but her eyes met his directly. "I'm not leaving this seat," she said. "You will update your system, notify the crew, and apologize to the cabin for the delay, or we will have a very public conversation at your next press event." Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. Then he turned and walked swiftly back toward the cockpit. The man in 2B let out a breath. Jordan whispered, "Yo, this is wild. She's not just a passenger. She's the speaker they flew in to fix their bias problems." And finally, someone in the cabin clapped once, then again, and the cabin filled with soft, awkward, then confident applause. Selina sat quietly. She didn't smile. She didn't bask. She just waited. The system would reset, and the truth, like it always did, would find its way to the surface. The applause faded as quickly as it began, like waves after a storm. The cabin returned to silence, but not the same kind of silence as before. This one was heavier, more reflective. It wasn't just the sound of people waiting to depart anymore. It was the stillness that follows realization, the hush that settles after someone tells a truth you can't unhear. Selina leaned her head against the window, her fingers tracing the leather armrest as though anchoring herself. Her reflection stared back at her from the curved glass. Eyes calm, but weighted. Outside, baggage carts circled slowly. A ground crew member tilted his head toward the aircraft, pointing toward the cockpit. Selina's eyes didn't leave the window, but her mind wandered backward, inward, into the spaces most people never see. There was a memory from 4 years ago. Different city, different airline, same pattern. She had been in Atlanta then, on her way to a conference in Toronto. Back then, she still double-checked the booking emails 3 times before every flight. Still wondered whether her title CEO would raise eyebrows if said aloud. She had worn a gray suit, no jewelry, just soft loafers. The gate agent hadn't made eye contact when telling her she'd been randomly reassigned. The man who took her original seat had been wearing a fleece vest with the logo of a venture capital firm. That day, she hadn't fought it. She'd sat in the back of the plane next to the restroom, knees pulled in, holding a paper cup of lukewarm tea, wondering whether invisibility was safer than truth. But today was not that day. Today, she had chosen visibility, and it came with a price. In row 6. Jordan was still recording, though now more discreetly. His phone rested on the tray table, lens angled upward as if pretending to stream the in-flight safety video. Next to him, an elderly woman murmured a prayer. It was unclear whether it was for Selina For the flight? Or for something deeper, maybe all three? Selina straightened, suddenly aware of her breath. It had become shallow, without her noticing, as if her body had decided to fold in on itself while her mind stayed sharp. She drew in a full breath, slow and intentional, and let it out just as gradually. Breathe, she told herself, not just to calm down, but to claim space. Because sometimes that's what breathing became. Resistance. The curtain near the galley fluttered again. A different flight attendant stepped out. A younger man, probably mid-30s, with brown hair and a name tag that read Mason. He walked to the front of the cabin and addressed the passengers in a voice that tried hard not to tremble. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We experienced a brief systems delay, which has now been resolved. The aircraft manifest has been updated. All boarding passes and seat assignments have been verified. We are preparing for departure. A few passengers clapped. Some sighed with relief. Others said nothing at all. Mason glanced at Selina, gave the briefest respectful nod, then returned to the galley. Selina didn't move. She stayed perfectly still, hands folded gently in her lap. Beside her, the man in 2B gave her a side glance, not intrusive, just grateful. She wasn't going to give that seat up. He said to no one in particular, "Good." Selina turned to him. "Why does that surprise you?" He looked sheepish. "I guess. I'm used to people avoiding conflict, especially when it's easier to just walk away." Selina nodded. "It's not easier. It only looks easier from the outside." That made him quiet. As the engines began to hum, the cabin lights flickered, flight mode, then safety video. The image of a smiling attendant demonstrating how to fasten a seatbelt filled the screen. Selina didn't watch. She knew the steps by heart, not just for safety, but for survival. Tighten the belt, brace for impact, locate the nearest exit. Only this time, there would be no exit until the wheels left the ground. And even then, the real flight had already begun the moment she decided to stay seated. Halfway through the safety video, her phone buzzed again. Ellen Royce. This time, the message was short. "I know what happened. Call me when you land." Selina placed the phone face down. The plane began to taxi. As it rolled forward, a small child near the window pointed at another plane lifting off. "Look, Mom, that one's already in the sky." Selina looked out too. The sky was pale blue, fading toward gold at the edges. A few wisps of cloud stretched lazily across the horizon, like threads waiting to be woven into something bigger. She thought of her mother then, of her voice in the kitchen, stirring black-eyed peas with one hand and gesturing with the other, telling stories about dignity, about how it didn't always make you popular, but it would always make you whole. Her mother used to say, "Sometimes people don't want to see you rise, not because you can't fly, but because they were taught to believe someone like you was never meant to." And yet here she was, in seat 2A, not by accident, not by grace, but by right. As the plane lifted off the ground, Selina's eyes filled with light from the window. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply existed fully, powerfully, and unflinchingly, high above the city, far from the assumptions and the stares. She reclaimed something that had been chipped away flight after flight, meeting after meeting, room after room. Not just a seat, but her breath, her ground, her name. In the rows behind her, the cabin grew quiet again, not out of fear, but something closer to reverence. For the woman who did not move, and the power of that stillness. At 31,000 feet, the air became thinner, but strangely, Selina could breathe more easily than she had on the ground. It wasn't peace she felt. It wasn't closure either. It was something more raw, like the sting of alcohol on a healing wound. Sharp, honest. The captain's voice broke through the cabin speakers with a practiced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Lane from the flight deck. We're cruising smoothly over Ohio airspace. We'll be landing in Seattle in approximately 4 hours. The weather looks good ahead. Thank you again for your patience and cooperation." Selina adjusted the overhead light and pulled out her leather-bound notebook. She didn't flip to a new page. She went back. 6 pages. A note she had scribbled the night before during a midnight call with Ellen. It read in capital letters, "Do not dim to make others comfortable." She let her pen hover over the words for a moment. Her hand was steady, but her mind, it was working through a maze. What would be the consequences of what just happened? Not only to her, but to all the quiet women who had been moved to the back of the plane so someone else could feel more important. What about the girls watching online, growing up trying to be small so they wouldn't be seen as threatening? Selina didn't see herself as heroic. She had simply stopped compromising. She had stopped apologizing for sitting where she belonged. She closed the notebook and looked to her right. The man in 2B, his name was Mark Hastings. She had learned was still watching her with a kind of respectful wariness, as if unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Selina offered a gentle nod. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know who you were when I boarded. I mean, I still don't know everything. But I looked you up." Selina smiled faintly. "People always did." Mark continued, his voice low. "I run a software company. 10 years in, we went through 3 funding rounds. I've sat on panels. I've shared stages with women like you. But none of those stages ever had you on them. I think that's a mistake we've all made." She didn't respond right away. "It's not about panels," she said finally. "It's about who controls the microphone." He nodded slowly. His phone buzzed in his hand. A news alert. "You might want to see this," he said, tilting the screen toward her. Selina's photo was already circulating, a grainy still from Jordan's video, where she sat calmly in seat 2A, flanked by startled passengers and a crew member mid-sentence. The headline read, "Black CEO refuses to be removed from first class. Viral video sparks airline backlash." Her stomach tightened. She had expected attention, maybe even coverage, but not this fast, not this viral. "In the row behind her," Jordan whispered to his seatmate, then passed his phone over. A few more passengers began refreshing their feeds, glancing subtly towards Selina as if they now shared a cabin with history rather than a fellow traveler. Selina turned away from it all and stared out the window. She thought of the first time she was told she was too much. It wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a third-grade classroom. She had asked too many questions. They said, interrupted too often, showed too much certainty. And so, the teacher wrote home to her mother, saying Selina needed to be reminded how to be appropriate in group settings. Her mother had stared at that note like it was a riddle and simply said, "They don't know what to do with a girl who doesn't whisper." Now, decades later, she was still that girl, only she had learned to whisper just enough to survive. But survival wasn't living, and silence wasn't safety. Selina's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Ellen. It was her assistant, Mia. Mia's message was short but urgent. "The story's gaining traction. I'm managing press. Legal wants to brief. Ellen's drafting a statement. Want me to loop you in now or wait until we land? Selena typed back, wait. Let them wonder a little. She wasn't trying to be strategic. She was just tired of rushing to explain herself to people who had already decided who she wasn't. The curtain in the galley rustled again. Mason reappeared with a bottle of water. He crouched beside her seat, speaking quietly, respectfully. Ms. Brooks, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I wasn't the one who made the initial call, but I also didn't stop it. I saw you. I saw the look on your face, and I hesitated. Selena studied him. He looked young, but not inexperienced. His eyes held both apology and exhaustion. You were afraid of doing the wrong thing, she said gently. Yes, he admitted, and I did. She reached for the water bottle, but kept her eyes on him. Do you know what I fear? She asked. He shook his head. That people will only learn from this because they're afraid of losing their jobs, not because they believe it was wrong. Mason blinked. I do believe it was wrong. And I think the fear wasn't just about protocol. It was about how many times we've seen people like you removed, and nobody said anything. Not passengers, not crew, not even management. Selena softened. Then let this be the last time. He nodded once, stood, and returned to the galley without saying another word. The sky outside had turned a soft lavender, the kind that appeared only mid-flight, when the world below seemed quiet and the world above was filled with a hush too big for language. Selena closed her eyes and leaned back. She didn't sleep, but she rested. It was a kind of rest that came not from comfort, but from clarity. Not because the world had changed, but because she had changed how she moved through it. She wasn't flying toward peace. She was flying through resistance. And maybe, just maybe, she was teaching the air how to carry her differently this time. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled into quiet murmurs, screen glow faces, and scattered sighs. Flight attendants moved with practiced silence, offering drinks and collecting trays. The mood was calm again, but inside Selena Brooks, the quiet had only just begun to stir. She stared at the folded blanket across her lap. She hadn't touched it since Mason placed it there, an hour earlier, along with a whisper of apology. She didn't need warmth from wool. She needed it from the system that had always been colder than any cabin air. The screen in front of her displayed a slow-moving map. The plane was somewhere above Montana now, a soft blue arc tracing their path west. She watched it like one might watch a wound form under skin, knowing something would swell before it healed. Her mind returned to the seat, not 2A, but the very first seat she had ever boarded as a professional. She was 22, fresh from Columbia Business School, dressed in an oatmeal blazer that still had the tag sewn in the sleeve. Her first cross-country flight for her first pitch as an intern with Wexler Holdings. Back then, she had asked for a window seat, eager to see America from above. But before the plane had even lifted off, the man beside her had leaned over and said, "You don't really belong in this kind of seat, do you?" She had smiled awkwardly, laughed, even. Then spent 5 hours pressed against the window, silent, hot with shame she couldn't name. That same man, as it turned out, was one of the junior partners at the firm. He never remembered the comment, but she never forgot. Selena shook the memory away. History had a strange way of seating itself beside her on flights. She opened her laptop and connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. It was slow, but strong enough to retrieve the flood of notifications now waiting. Her inbox was overflowing. Headlines, mentions, anonymous tips, requests for comment, statements from civil rights organizations, a personal email from Professor Angela Rhodes titled, "You have no idea how many girls just sat up straighter because of you." Selena scrolled until she reached a flagged message from Mia. Subject: Urgent Institutional History. She clicked. Attached was a PDF titled 2009-2019 Incidents Involving Passenger Misidentification. The document had been part of a legal discovery process for a previous class action lawsuit, one the airline had quietly settled out of court. The file showed what Selena feared. In the span of 10 years, the airline had documented 47 boarding irregularities involving women of color in first or business class. In 38 of those, the women had been removed or reseated. In 32 of those, the official reason cited was ticket verification confusion or disruption prevention, and in not a single one had the airline publicly apologized. Selena scrolled slowly. This wasn't a story. It was a pattern. She let out a breath and whispered, as if to the air around her, "How many seats does a person have to buy before she's allowed to stay in them?" The woman in 3A stirred slightly, as though sensing the emotional weight seeping into the aisle, but she did not speak. Selena drafted a reply to Mia. "Pull all internal memos tied to that settlement. I want to know who signed off. And start pulling donor records for the nonprofit that sued them. I think I remember a woman named Natalie Cho from their board. I want to talk to her." She hesitated before hitting send. There was something else, deeper, more personal. She hadn't said aloud in years, but now it bubbled up. She typed, "Also Mia. Find me the contact list from our old cohort at the Jennings Fellowship. I need to reconnect with a few people, especially Ravi Hassan and Cynthia Gray. Tell them it's urgent." Selena sat back. Her fingers trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet rage that had aged into purpose. She was done making requests. This would not be another story that went viral for a weekend and disappeared by Monday. She was going to ground something larger than a flight. She was going to ground the rot in the foundation. Selena opened her notebook again. This time, she flipped to a blank page. She wrote in deliberate cursive, "They will try to offer settlements instead of solutions, apologies instead of answers, and PR statements instead of policies." But history is not a press release. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken if someone refuses to sit quietly in 2A ever again. She underlined the word refuses. Then her screen lit up with a notification. A direct message from her old professor, Angela Rhodes. It read, "I watched the video 5 times. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to memorize the way your spine did not bend. That matters. That posture will become gospel for women who needed to see what resistance without violence looks like." Selena smiled. She hadn't meant to be gospel. She had only meant to be firm. But perhaps, in a world so allergic to the clarity of black women, stillness became sermon. Just then, the captain's voice returned. "We're starting our initial descent into Seattle. Cabin crew, please prepare for arrival." Selena closed her notebook and tucked it into her bag. She glanced again at the seat next to her. Mark Hastings was asleep now, his arms crossed, head tilted awkwardly. He looked like a man who had things to unlearn, and for the first time had paused long enough to begin. Across the aisle, Mason caught her eye one last time. He nodded. No apology this time, just recognition. Selena took one last look at the cabin. It was all so sterile, so familiar, so rehearsed. But behind every gesture, there were ghosts. Ghosts of women like her. Ghosts of seats that were never offered. Ghosts of dignity denied mid-flight. And now, She was carrying them down to the ground with her, not as burdens, but as witnesses. The wheels touched the tarmac with a jolt that rattled coffee cups and consciousness alike. Flight 342 had landed in Seattle. For most passengers, it marked the end of a long journey. But for Selena Brooks, it was only the beginning of a reckoning that had been circling overhead for decades. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Selena remained seated, calm but coiled. Her fingers rested on the strap of her leather bag, the same one she carried to her first board meeting 10 years earlier. It had seen mergers, acquisitions, and 100 different glass-walled negotiations, but it had never held what it now carried: an unshakable resolve. Seatbelt signs chimed off. Passengers rose, stretching, yawning, murmuring about missed connections and rental cars. Selena stayed still. Across the aisle, Mason, the flight attendant, stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her, the way someone finally sees the painting they've passed 100 times. The look held something like apology, but deeper than that awareness. "Thank you for not making this uglier than it had to be," he said gently. Selena replied, "Sometimes the quietest things do the most damage. That includes silence." He didn't argue. He simply nodded and stepped back. Passengers began filing out. Some offered Selena brief glances, and a few murmured words of support. A woman in a red sweater slipped her a folded note as she passed. Selena tucked it into her coat without looking. She rose, straightened her jacket, and stepped into the aisle. The moment her feet touched the jet bridge, she could feel the shift. Voices, cameras, a low buzz of chaos filtered in like smoke. Selena stepped forward and the scene hit her fully. Reporters lined the terminal hallway, phones raised, lenses flashing, airport security standing awkwardly between curiosity and protocol. There was a ripple of tension, the kind that made the air feel thick with decisions not yet made. "Miss Brooks, over here. Did you expect this much attention? Is it true you grounded the flight personally? Are you planning legal action? Do you believe this airline has a history of racism? Are you calling for a boycott?" The questions flew at her like hail, but she walked calmly, head high, expression neutral. Her silence, once imposed by systems stronger than her, was now a strategy of her choosing. She spotted Mia at the far end of the corridor, dressed in a fitted navy suit. Mia looked like she'd aged 3 years in the 6 hours since they last spoke, but her eyes lit up when she saw Selena. "We need to move now. We have a car waiting out back." "But there's something you need to see first," she said quickly, slipping her phone into Selena's hands. The screen showed a live stream, not from a news outlet, but from a passenger, an older white man named Daniel Keene, who had been sitting in economy. He had recorded the entire moment Selena was confronted by the boarding agent and uploaded it with the caption, "Black CEO denied her seat." Because, why exactly? The video had 4.2 million views. Under it, comments flooded in, most in her favor, some predictably cruel. But the top comment struck Selena in the chest. "My daughter is watching this next to me. She's 12. She just asked, 'Why does that woman look calm even though they're being so unfair?' I told her, 'Because sometimes that's how you carry power.' Thank you, Ms. Brooks." Selena handed the phone back. A second wave of reporters clustered near the escalators, shouting more questions. "Are you going to sue? What do you want from the airline?" Selena paused at the top of the escalator. Then, finally, she turned. "I don't want anything from the airline," she said calmly. "I want something for every girl who has ever been asked to prove she belongs." I want something for every boy who's been taught silence equals safety. I want something for every professional who's worked twice as hard for half the benefit of the doubt. You want a settlement? One reporter asked. Selena shook her head. I want accountability. I want policy. I want training that actually works. And I want someone to admit that the reason this keeps happening is because we've normalized suspicion over inclusion. Then she turned and walked away. Down the escalator. Through the terminal. Toward the black sedan waiting outside. Inside the car. The noise fell away. Selena exhaled slowly and glanced at Mia. Is it crazy I feel more tired now than I did during the whole flight? Mia gave her a sad smile. That's what emotional labor feels like when it finally stops being invisible. Selena leaned back against the seat. Outside, Seattle was gray and wet. The kind of rain that softened everything's streets, skylines, shoulders. It was the kind of weather where memories felt heavier and truths stood taller. Mia handed her a folder. You asked for background on the nonprofit that sued the airline back in 2014. Found it. And you were right. Natalie Cho was their board chair. She handed Selena a second sheet. Also, Cynthia Gray's in town, and she wants to meet, she said, and I quote, tell her she's not alone at the podium anymore. Selena felt her throat tighten. She had stood alone for so long, it was hard to imagine sharing the weight. The car pulled up to a quiet brownstone in Capitol Hill. Mia looked at her. You sure you're ready for cameras tomorrow? Selena nodded. I'm not ready, but I'm certain. She stepped out and walked through the drizzle toward the door. Her heels clicked against the wet stone, each step a small refusal to retreat. Inside, a team waited, lawyers, strategists, former colleagues, quiet allies. Selena stepped into the room, set her bag down, and looked around. Let's make this bigger than a headline, she said. Let's make it history. The room had no windows, just four walls, a glass table, and the faint hum of fluorescent lighting that made everything feel colder than it was. Selena Brooks stood at the end of the table, not seated, not sipping from the untouched water bottle in front of her. She didn't come for comfort. She came for clarity. Across from her sat Raymond Steele, the chief compliance officer of AeroPoint Airlines. To his right, a legal counsel whose name Selena didn't remember. To his left, a public relations consultant with careful posture and practiced eyes. Her name was Marcia Lane, and she spoke as if every sentence needed to pass through a filter labeled optics. Selena, we want to begin by offering a formal apology for what occurred on Flight 342. What happened to you does not reflect the values of AeroPoint Airlines. Selena's eyes didn't flinch. She waited a beat before answering. That's the problem. It does reflect your values. It reflects them too well. That's why it was so seamless. The room stilled. Marcia adjusted her blazer, then leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion across all verticals. This was an unfortunate individual incident, and we're addressing it internally. No, Selena replied quietly. This was a system incident. It only felt individual because I happened to be the one standing in the way of your routine. Raymond cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the meeting. Ms. Brooks, we understand your frustration, but if the goal here is cooperation, I'd suggest we approach this with a mutual aim. Selena finally took the chair. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, and locked eyes with him. You think this is about my frustration? I don't need a personal apology. I need a public transformation. I want your training manuals. I want access to your bias response metrics. I want the last 5 years of internal complaints processed by your Diversity and Ethics Office. And I want to know how many of those complaints ended with terminations or with settlements wrapped in NDAs. Marcia opened her mouth. Selena cut her off. And no, I'm not here for a check. I'm not looking for hush money or a seat on your advisory board. What I want can't be tied up in a press release. I want accountability with backbone. I want systems to shake. There was a pause. Then Raymond glanced toward legal counsel, who responded with a clipped voice. Some of what you're requesting is proprietary, and disclosing it would present a risk to competitive standing. Selena smiled for the first time. That's a beautiful way of saying, we're hiding behind profit margins. You want to compete in the marketplace? Compete in justice, too. The room was quiet again. Mia sat in the corner of the room, silent but attentive, typing notes and recording timestamps. Her eyes met Selena's for a moment, and it was all the reassurance she needed. Raymond took off his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. What exactly are you proposing? Selena leaned back, her voice low and measured. I'm proposing a 5-phase reform plan policy audit, staff retraining, third-party bias oversight, a whistleblower safe reporting protocol, and a public transparency report issued quarterly. If those don't happen, I take this conversation to federal regulators, to shareholders, and to a platform 10 times louder than this room. Marcia jumped in. That sounds more like a threat than a partnership. It's not a threat, Selena said. It's a mirror. There was something about the way she said it plain, steady, not laced with anger that made it undeniable. She wasn't here to spar. She was here to build something on the ashes of pretense. Raymond slowly nodded. You'll get your first 3 requests by Friday. Give us a week for the rest. Make it 5 days, Selena said. I know how long it takes to find buried truth. I've done it before. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Before she reached the door, Raymond spoke again. Selena, why push this hard, this publicly? She paused, hand resting on the doorknob, because I remember being 12 years old, watching my mother walk off a flight with red-rimmed eyes and a broken voice because someone decided her presence was too loud for business class. I remember how she folded that pain into silence so I could keep believing the world was fair. And I promised myself if I ever had the chance to make noise for someone else, I wouldn't waste it whispering. Then she left the room, back at the hotel. The lights of the city flickered through the window as she sat in silence, reflecting. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but brimming with everything unsaid. Mia walked in quietly, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. The Seattle Times just called you the boarding gate Rosa Parks. They don't know whether to cheer you or cancel you. Selena let out a soft laugh. Let them try both. I'm not running for office. I'm standing my ground. Mia sat beside her. There's a media panel tomorrow. They want you to join. Everyone's watching now. Selena looked down at her tea. What if I'm not the voice they want? Mia didn't hesitate. You're the voice they need, because you're not shouting. You're shaping. Selena nodded slowly, then whispered, more to herself than anyone. So many years I spent building a company, thinking success would protect me from this exact moment. And here I am, back in the same fight my mother thought she had to survive alone. She wiped a hand across her face. Then maybe it's not about protection anymore. Maybe it's about presence, not shielding myself, but showing up. She stood again, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Cars moved below like veins through concrete. Life carrying on. People unaware of the storm brewing quietly in policy rooms and social feeds, But storms didn't always scream. Sometimes they arrived as a calm woman in a tailored coat. Sometimes they landed with no thunder, just truth. Selena turned back to Mia. Let's draft the proposal. All 5 phases. Detailed, sharp. We send it in the morning. You got it, Mia said, already reaching for her laptop. And let's title it The Boarding Gate Initiative. If they didn't want change before, they'll have to greet it now. That night, Selena didn't sleep much. But when she did, she dreamed of her mother standing in a field of clouds, no longer holding in her tears, just smiling, wide and unburdened. The return flight to Chicago was nearly full. Selena boarded quietly, dressed in a soft navy turtleneck and slate-gray slacks, her coat folded neatly over her arm. This time there was no camera crew, no drama at the boarding gate, just her, a single carry-on, and a dozen internal checklists echoing in her mind. She walked down the aisle of Flight 611, scanning rows until she found her seat in 3A. First class again, not because of vanity, but because space and silence were precious commodities now. The kind you needed to think clearly. Mia was 2 rows behind, typing something fast on her tablet. Selena gave a small nod, then settled into her seat, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. Across the aisle in 3F sat a girl, maybe 11 or 12. She wore a bright yellow hoodie and clutched a travel pillow shaped like a cat. Her hair was pulled into 2 puffs that bounced every time she moved. She glanced at Selena, then did a double take. "You're her," the girl said suddenly, eyes wide. "From the video. You're the one who stood up on the plane." Selena gave a soft smile. "I suppose I am." The girl leaned forward excitedly, not shy in the way some children are when awe strikes them. "My mom showed me the clip. She said you were brave. She said you did what most grown-ups are too scared to do." Selena wasn't sure what to say to that. Praise from adults was one thing. From a child, it felt heavier, more binding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." "I'm Raina," the girl added, extending her hand like a business executive. Selena shook it gently. "Nice to meet you, Raina." "I'm Selena." Raina beamed, then looked thoughtful for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you scared?" Selena took a breath. That was not a question she could answer with a headline or a soundbite. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I was scared of being disbelieved, of being made small, of them twisting the truth and making it seem like I overreacted. But I was more scared of what would happen if I said nothing, if I let them erase me quietly." Raina nodded like she understood far more than her age might suggest. "Sometimes I feel that too. Like in school, when I see a teacher treat someone unfairly and I want to speak up. But then I think maybe it'll just make it worse." Selena leaned in, her voice low and steady. "It's okay to feel that way. It's not your job to fix everything. But if you can say something safely, even something small, it can help others know they're not invisible. And that matters." Raina looked out the window, then back at Selena. "Do you ever regret it? Starting all this?" Selena paused. She could hear the engines powering up, the soft ding of the seatbelt light above, but her focus stayed on the girl across the aisle. "I don't regret telling the truth," she said, "but I do feel the weight of it. Speaking up comes with responsibility. People listen, people judge, some cheer, some attack. But I've learned that silence is also a decision, and I'd rather carry weight than carry regret." Raina smiled again, this time a little softer. "I think I want to be like you when I grow up." Selena blinked, caught off guard. There it was again, that unfiltered truth children give so freely. Not wrapped in applause, not demanded by press, just honest admiration. "You'll be your own kind of strong," Selina said, "and that'll be enough." The girl turned back toward her seat as the flight attendant passed through the aisle checking belts. Selina sat back, but her chest ached in the best way. It was the kind of ache that reminded you you're alive, that your story reached someone who might carry the torch next, somewhere over Indiana. The lights dimmed for mid-flight cruising. Selina stared at the clouds below, thinking about her mother again. She imagined her sitting beside her, as she used to on the porch in Detroit with a cold glass of tea and fireflies blinking in the dusk. "I hope I'm doing this right," she whispered silently. "You are," came the imagined reply. Later, as passengers began to stir and stretch, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare. We'll be on the ground in about 25 minutes. Selina closed her tablet. She hadn't read a word. The conversation with Raina stayed with her, echoing louder than any article. As they landed and passengers gathered their things, Raina stood and looked back at Selina one more time. "You should write a book," she said. "I'd read it." Selina laughed gently. "Maybe I will." Back in the terminal, Selina walked beside Mia, both of them quiet for a moment. Then Mia said something unexpected. "Do you know what Raina reminded me of what you... At 15, that summer you wrote the letter to the editor about the bus driver who refused to pick up the Harris twins in your neighborhood." Selina's brow lifted. "You remember that. You marched right into the paper's office, handed that letter to the receptionist like it was gold. And it was. They published it the next week." Selina smiled softly. "I forgot all about that." But Mia hadn't. She remembered everything. And maybe that's what made their partnership work. One of them carried the cause. The other carried the history. As they walked out into the Chicago wind, Selina pulled her coat tighter, but not because of the cold. It was the world again. Raw, loud, unyielding. She stepped into the car, waiting for them, her thoughts already moving ahead to the Aero Point Board hearing scheduled in 3 days. The fight wasn't over, but today, one small voice on seat 3F had reminded her why she started, and sometimes that was all the fuel you needed to keep going. The Aero Point headquarters in downtown Chicago stood like a glass monolith, shimmering in the early morning haze. From the outside, it looked serene, polished, timeless. But inside, the air carried tension sharp, quiet, and unmistakable. Selina arrived precisely at 8:42 p.m. She wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit and carried nothing but a slim leather folder. Her hair was braided back into a low bun. No entourage, no press. Only Mia stood by her side, phone off, energy focused. The executive floor had changed little since Selina last walked it. Familiar leather chairs lined the waiting area. Art she had helped commission still hung untouched on the walls. But the receptionist, a new face, didn't recognize her. That was fine. Recognition was no longer her goal. "They're expecting you," the receptionist said, voice neutral, eyes flicking toward a pair of heavy wooden doors down the hall. Inside the boardroom, 12 people sat around a long oval table, mostly men. All dressed like strategy had a uniform, polished shoes, fitted suits, pens tucked in shirt pockets like weapons. At the head sat Mitchell Langley, AeroPoint's interim CEO. He rose when Selina entered, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming." Selina nodded once, took the empty seat across from him. Mia remained in the corner, standing silent. Mitchell cleared his throat. "As you know, Today's meeting was called following recent public events involving our airline division. Eralis, the footage, the fallout, the grounding each of us here has felt the impact. But we need clarity on what you want. Selena, what do you expect from us? She looked around the room. 12 faces, 1 table, 100 conversations beneath the surface. What I want, she said slowly, is not complicated. I want accountability. I want systemic correction. And I want AeroPoint to become the standard, not the exception, when it comes to treating people with human dignity. Someone on the left scoffed lightly. Selena turned her gaze toward him. Is that funny to you? It was Garrett Rhodes, the director of aviation infrastructure. His voice was smooth, dismissive. What's funny, Ms. Brooks, is that you think one emotional moment justifies policy overhauls. We've reviewed the footage. We saw the incident. But the crew followed protocol. If anything, you're asking us to undo systems that protect us legally. Selena leaned forward. What you call protocol, I call permission. You've built a system where bias hides behind policy, where discretion becomes discrimination, where boarding passes determine worth. Mitchell intervened. Let's keep this constructive. It is constructive, Selena replied, her voice calm but unyielding. I've brought 5 points of reform, all evidence-based, all achievable, and none of them optional if AeroPoint wants to survive this. Garrett crossed his arms. Is that a threat? No, Selena said. It's a mirror, and you don't like what's in it. She opened her folder and began listing them one by one. 1. Mandatory DEI retraining for all frontline airline employees, especially gate and in-flight staff. 2. A zero-tolerance clause in all partner airline agreements for racial, gender, and disability-based discrimination, enforceable by contract. 3. Implementation of the Passenger Advocacy Liaison Program, a third-party representative available during all major boarding zones and domestic hubs. 4. Immediate review and revision of internal complaint response timeframes. No more 60-day black hole of silence. 10 business days. Written accountability. 5. Board-level diversification quotas within 12 months. Not suggestions, requirements, because leadership must reflect those they serve. A heavy silence followed. Mitchell tapped his pen twice before speaking. Selena, your ideas are compelling, and the data you've included is strong. But reforms like these require votes, budgets, time. Selena looked him square in the eye. And while you wait, how many more people get erased? Another board member, Evelyn Chan, the chief compliance officer, finally spoke. I watched the footage more than once. I kept wondering what would have happened if no one recorded it. If you had sat down and said nothing, if that moment passed like all the others. Selena nodded. That's exactly what happens. Every day. To people without platforms, without witnesses. That is the system you're defending. Mitchell ran a hand through his graying hair. He didn't like conflict, but this was no longer about comfort. If we do this, he said slowly, if we back these reforms publicly, we risk lawsuits. We risk shareholders pulling out. We risk backlash. Selena stood. Her voice never rose, but it filled the room like thunderclouds gathering. And if you don't, you lose your soul. You lose people like me, like Mia, like every person who boarded that plane believing they were safe and equal and deserving of basic respect. And you lose the future. Because the generation behind us, they don't forget. They document, they vote, they boycott, and they build something better when you failed. Evelyn leaned forward. If we adopted your reforms, what would you give us in return? Selina smiled faintly. You'd get me back on your side. Not as a CEO, not as a board member, but as a voice. As someone who will tell the world we didn't just shame a system, we changed it. The room shifted. A quiet calculus played behind every glance. Profit versus principle. Risk versus reputation. But the math had already changed. Selina wasn't alone. Millions had seen her stand. Millions had stayed. Mitchell finally stood and extended his hand. Let's vote. By noon, 10 of 12 board members had agreed to adopt all 5 reforms in phased implementation. Garrett abstained. One other dissented. The room was far from unified, but the tide had turned. As Selina walked out of the building, the wind whipped against her cheeks. She stopped at the plaza fountain across the street and watched the water ripple. Mia approached, silent for a beat, then said, "That was the longest 5 minutes I've ever witnessed." Selina laughed quietly. It wasn't 5 minutes. It felt like 5 years. They sat on the fountain's edge, letting the cold air settle over their bones. "You think it'll stick?" Mia asked. Selina considered it. "It will if we keep holding them to it. Change isn't an event. It's pressure, applied daily, in every corner." Mia looked out toward the passing buses and bustling sidewalks. "So, what now?" Selina took a breath. "Now we build." It had been exactly 22 days since Selina Brooks stepped onto an aircraft, not because she feared the sky, but because she had needed to reclaim it on her terms. She had refused to fly until the reforms passed. Now they had, and this time she would not board as a ghost. Selina arrived at Gate C-17 in Houston's Intercontinental Airport just before sunrise. The concourse was mostly quiet, except for a few business travelers in wrinkled suits and a mother rocking a sleepy toddler in her lap. She wore simple clothes, a navy blue blouse, soft beige slacks, and a carry-on that had once belonged to her mother. Nothing about her outfit demanded attention, but her posture did, upright, present, unapologetically whole. When she approached the boarding area, she felt the first flicker of hesitation. Not fear exactly, just a memory trying to sneak past her guard. But this time, there was someone new at the gate. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to Aralis. May I check your boarding pass?" The woman was no older than 25, with short coiled hair, kind eyes, and a crisp blazer that somehow looked freshly pressed despite the hour. Selina handed it over. "First class, Ms. Brooks. We've been expecting you. Let me walk you down personally." Selina blinked. "Expecting me?" "Yes, ma'am. We're piloting the new liaison protocol. 1 passenger per flight is selected to receive a direct boarding escort and feedback conversation if they choose. It's voluntary. And this time, that person is you." The young woman led her down the jet bridge. As they walked, Selina noticed the small changes. A digital welcome sign near the entrance, a printed notice about respectful service standards framed on the wall. Subtle, but deliberate. Before stepping onto the aircraft, the woman turned. "My name's Taryn. By the way, first generation in my family to work in aviation. You made that possible. Just wanted you to know that." Selina's throat tightened. She nodded, unsure how to respond without unraveling. "On board." The flight attendants greeted her warmly, not with overcompensation, just decency, presence, like they had been trained not to perform, but to connect. The cabin was still boarding, and Selina took her seat by the window. 2A, the same seat from before. She had requested it deliberately. Closure required witness, return, choice. Across the aisle sat an elderly white man with thick glasses and a leather-bound Bible in his lap. He smiled politely. "Heading to Chicago." Selina nodded. "You two, always. Grandkids can't hug themselves." She smiled, grateful for the simplicity of that answer, grateful for the absence of tension in his gaze. As the plane filled, she glanced around. A young black boy settled in a row behind her beside his father. An Indian couple unpacked toys for their toddler across the aisle. An elderly Chinese woman placed her oxygen pack under the seat, assisted gently by a crew member. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a hierarchy. It felt like a gathering, a reflection of the world rather than a rearranged version of it. But even as the announcements began, Selina's mind drifted to her father's last letter, to the fear in Mia's eyes that day at the terminal, to the silence of the crew during the worst moment of her life. She had filed lawsuits since, oversaw settlements, built systems, but healing. That was different. That had to come not through fire, but through return, through presence. The pilot's voice crackled on. "Good morning, folks. Welcome aboard Airlines Flight 303 nonstop to Chicago. Flight time is just under 3 hours. Conditions are smooth up top. We thank you for choosing to fly with us and remind you our crew is here not just for your safety, but your comfort and dignity as well." Selina felt the words land deeper than intended. Not just policy, not just branding. Dignity. Spoken aloud. That mattered. Mid-flight. After coffee was served and the hum of the engine softened to white noise, a flight attendant approached her discreetly. "Ms. Brooks, would you be willing to speak with our staff? The crew was briefed on your story during training. They've requested a conversation completely optional." Selina hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because sometimes being heard came with more weight than being silenced. She nodded. They brought her into the small galley. 4 crew members stood quietly, a mix of ages, backgrounds, genders. One wore a pin that read "First Flight Post-Reform." A woman with auburn hair and soft hands spoke first. "I watched the video from that day, the way they treated you, and how you responded. I've worked in this job for 18 years. I never knew how deep the rot went, until I saw your face." Another crew member, younger, added, "I used to think silence was neutrality, that if I just did my job and didn't interfere, I was safe. But I've realized safety without justice is just privilege in disguise." Selina listened, not to validate, but to witness. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing awareness over apology." The youngest member, barely 20, cleared his throat. "Do you ever stop being angry?" Selina looked out the small porthole window by the galley. "Anger's not the enemy," she said. "It's what you do with it. I don't live in it, but I honor it, because it tells me something sacred was violated." They nodded, not with answers, but with understanding. When she returned to her seat, the man across the aisle was reading again. The little boy behind her had fallen asleep on his father's arm. As they began their descent into Chicago, Selina looked out the window at the slow spread of the city skyline. The same place she had walked out of weeks ago with trembling hands and silent fury. Now she was returning not to fight, but to build, to continue, to remind those who watched that stories could fracture but still be whole, that air could betray but still be claimed. She closed her eyes as the wheels touched down, and for the first time in years, the sky listened back. The podium was modest, a simple wood-grain finish beneath the morning light. No golden seal, no velvet ropes, just a small microphone, a few folding chairs, and a crowd that stretched well beyond the event tent at Chicago's Midway Executive Terminal. Selena Brooks stood at the edge of the platform, fingertips resting gently on the side of her coat. The wind was crisp but not harsh. She could see her breath, and for the first time in a long time, she welcomed it, proof that she was alive, present, unafraid. She had not planned to speak today. Originally, this gathering had been organized by Airless Global to announce the completion of their diversity and dignity overhaul. 47 new internal policies, 2,000 retrained staff, public reports released quarterly. They had asked Selena to attend only as a guest, a silent symbol. But when she arrived at the airport that morning, she saw more than reporters. She saw young girls holding signs with her name in glitter, elders in wheelchairs wrapped in their church best, pilots standing tall with pride instead of posture. And somewhere in the back row, Mia, silent, present, not a child anymore, but a witness. So when they offered her the microphone, Selena stepped forward. Her voice was calm, clear, as if the very air paused to listen. I stand before you not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a reminder that the sky does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to the present, to those who live in it, work in it, and have been erased from it for too long. She paused. Let the silence hold. 3 months ago, I was removed from an airplane because I was a black woman in seat 2A, because I did not fit the assumptions of wealth, of power, of place. And no one said anything. Not a passenger, not a pilot, not a single soul on that plane stood up to ask why. Another pause. Longer this time, but silence has an echo. And when you learn to hear it, it becomes thunder. The crowd stirred. What happened that day was not new. It was not even rare. But what we do with pain is what shapes legacy. You see, I chose not to shout. Not because shouting is wrong, but because I had shouted before and no one listened. So I wrote, I documented, I partnered. I called forward every silent policy and named it in public light. She looked over at the Airless executive team seated in the front row. She nodded once. They nodded back. To their credit, they did not hide. They did not bury the incident or paint it in corporate apology. They invited transformation, risked headlines, restructured leadership, because they knew that dignity is not a gesture, it is a practice. Selena stepped closer to the front of the platform. I am not naive. A policy cannot unlearn centuries. A plaque cannot repair grief. But we begin, not because we are perfect, but because we refuse to be silent. She turned to the crowd behind the cameras now, to the flight attendants who have spoken up, to the pilots who requested implicit bias training voluntarily, to the maintenance staff who now have name tags that include their pronouns, to the children watching who now believe they are welcome in the sky. This is your legacy, too. Someone in the back began to clap, then another. Soon the applause spread like a wave. Not thunderous, but deep, steady, affirming. Selena waited until it quieted. I want to share something with you. A small story. Years ago, before any of this, I was just a girl on a farm outside Montgomery. We had one radio, and every Saturday, my father would sit with me and tune into air traffic control frequencies, not because he was a pilot, but because he loved the sound of the sky being shared. She smiled gently. He would say, "Listen to that. Baby girl. Hear how careful they speak. That's the language of trust. That's how strangers protect each other midair. That's how you know the world still believes in coordination." Her voice caught slightly, but she held steady. He died before he could ever board a plane. He never saw me grow into this life. But I carry his lesson in every room I enter. Speak with care. Build trust. Protect strangers. That is aviation at its soul. The audience stilled. A few wiped tears. Others just breathed, deeper than before. Selena turned slightly, facing the aircraft behind her. It was the newly renamed Unity 1, the same aircraft from the incident, now permanently assigned to equality routes, an Aeralis initiative prioritizing underserved regional flights, flown by diverse crews. She took one step closer to the jet and placed her hand gently against its metallic body. "Pain can ground you," she said quietly, "but so can purpose." She turned back to the crowd. "I want to thank you, not for your applause, but for your presence, for coming here today not just to witness a ceremony, but to reflect, to ask questions, to let the uncomfortable live beside the hopeful, because that's where change breathes, in the tension." She stepped down from the platform. Microphone lowered. There was no anthem, no fireworks, just wind and witness. Reporters surrounded her, but she waved them off softly. This moment did not belong to headlines. Instead, she walked directly to the last row, where Mia stood. They said nothing at first. Then Mia whispered, "You made it fly again." Selena nodded, wrapping her arms around the girl who once stared through a window, helpless, as the world erased her mother. "No, we did." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in wind and mourning. Later that day, a photo would go viral. Selena Brooks at the base of Unity 1, hand outstretched to a row of young girls boarding for their first ever flight. Behind her, the words painted on the aircraft door, "Welcome home. The sky remembers you." It would hang in classrooms. It would be discussed in boardrooms. It would even inspire a children's book. But Selena herself would never quote it, because legacy, she believed, was not what people remembered you for. It was what people practiced when no one else was watching. And now, they were watching, and they were ready. What started as a single act of discrimination became a movement in motion. Not through rage, but through resilience, through the power of one woman who refused to stay silent. Selena Brooks didn't scream. She documented. She didn't fight fire with fire. She rewrote the sky's rules with dignity, compassion, and unshakable presence. And in doing so, she taught the world that silence is never empty, it is a choice. This story is a reminder that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It wears a smile. It hides behind policies and uniforms. But even then, it wounds. It humiliates. It tries to erase. And yet there are people like Selena who stand, who speak, who build something better, not just for themselves, but for all of us. For every young girl who has ever been told she doesn't belong. For every voice that's been dismissed, overlooked, or displaced. If this story moved you, let it move others too. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and heal. Because this world needs more than outrage. It needs memory, justice, and you. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay human.